Hi, and welcome to this session about troubleshooting Exchange hybrid deployments. My name is Michael Van Horenbeeck. I'm an Exchange Server MVP and MCSM from Belgium. I've been working in the industry for about 13 years, mainly focusing on Exchange and Office 365. I frequently speak at different conferences. Last year I spoke at TechEd, MEC, Exchange Connections, and this year I'll be speaking at Ignite and hopefully too at Exchange Connections. So if you're at these events, please, come and find me so we can have a talk. I also blog for various tech websites and on my personal blog, which is basically my nickname, www.vanhybrid.com. I'm a member of the UC Architects podcast, even though it's been a while since I've been contributing. And last but not least, I do work for eNow Software, where I'm involved with product development. So what I do there is try and use my experience in the field about hybrid deployments and then put that into the product so that we make better monitoring solutions for both Exchange on-premises and Exchange in the cloud and hybrid deployments. Of course, these are not the only products that we have. We also have monitoring solutions for other Microsoft technologies like Active Directory, Link, and SharePoint. But I mainly focus on the Exchange-related stuff. So this being said, let's take a look at what we're going to talk about today. So, as you can see, the title of the session is Troubleshooting Hybrid Deployments, and what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what a hybrid deployment is. And for me, that is really, really important that people understand the limitations of a hybrid deployment because a lot of the problems or a lot of the questions that I get asked about hybrid deployments has to do with not understanding how things should be working in a hybrid deployment. Now, the reason why I'm pointing that out is mainly because some things that you might think that would work will actually not work. One of them being cross-premises permissions, right? I mean, you're not able to assign permissions to an on-premises mailbox if your mailbox is in Office 365, and vice versa. A lot of people perceive this as a broken feature, but it's actually by design. So we will talk about that hybrid deployment, the components that come into play, and the limitations, after which I will dive into the common issues that you will see in a hybrid deployment, issues that I've seen myself, questions I've been asked over and over again. Um, we'll talk a little bit about mailbox moves, the good, the bad, and the ugly. What's good about mailbox move, what's gonna fail, what's gonna catch you there. We're gonna talk about ADFS. So as soon as you have a hybrid deployment, it's very likely that you have deployed ADFS. It's not a requirement unless you have multi-forest hybrid deployments, but not a lot of people are in that situation, and myself included for lab purposes, I tend to use password synchronization, and even though it's a valuable alternative, most people still use ADFS though. And then last but not least, we'll take a look at DirSync, AADSync, AADConnect, all the possible ways of synchronizing objects to Office 365. And what I will do there is use a real-world example of how you can actually troubleshoot an error that you might see when synchronizing objects to Office 365. Now, it won't necessarily be in that order that we're going to tackle them, but at least these are the main topics. And then last but not least, I want to stop and talk a little bit about monitoring a hybrid deployment and why I believe that is really important. And I'm pretty sure that that is, food for thought, or at least a very good discussion. But I do believe that it's a very important thing, something which a lot of people, you have as an afterthought. But let's not ruin the surprise and talk about it now. Let's talk about it when we get there. So, first of all, let's talk a little bit about hybrid deployment, and I like doing that by starting with a quote of my own. It's not really very a deep thought, but at least a hybrid deployment is two distinct cross-premises Exchange organizations who are combined to act as a single organization through a series of customizations in both environments. So if you let that sink in for a little bit, there are some very important things that you can see in this two sentences, or actually one sentence. It's that, it's two environments. And even though that for an end user, the experience is almost transparent, it's still two environments. And as a result of these two different environments, there are things that will not be working. I mentioned one before, cross-premises permissions. That's a big no-no. There are things that work differently, mostly due to the directory synchronization process. It doesn't mean that things don't work, but for instance, if you enable mailbox, right? You create the mailbox on premises. Well, it might take up to 3 hours before that mailbox actually gets enabled in Office 365 because the default interval for DirSync is 3 hours. So just to point out a few little quirks which you have to take into account. And then last but not least, the series of customizations that I'm talking about is basically the magic that is being done by the hybrid configuration wizard. And the image on the next slide will actually give you more information about those customizations. So the hybrid configuration wizard, when it runs, it will actually do a lot of work in the background. It will set up organization relationships. It will set up an intra-organization connector if you're in Exchange 2013 CU5 or later. It will set up hybrid mail flow by setting up all the connectors. So there's a lot of configuration going on in your environment, and that's a good thing. However, these are all items where something could go wrong. No, I don't want to sound really pessimistic here, and usually when you're in a hybrid deployment, things continue to work as they should. But it wouldn't be the first time that something breaks, especially the organization relationships. We've seen a few times over the past 2 or 3 years that they would break out of the blue because of some certificate changes, and I'm going to talk about them too. So as we take a 10,000 foot view of a hybrid deployment, we have the both environments. On the left hand side, you've got Office 365. On the right hand side, your on-premises environment. And then we see the tie-in between Azure Active Directory and the on-premises Active Directory, where DirSync plays a really important role for making sure that both environments maintain a similar view of the world, as I'd like to call it. We have that ADFS component, which is optional but usually deployed, which takes care of authentication, and then your users who can pretty much be anywhere on the internet, on the internal network. So depending on where your users are, they might be interacting differently with the ADFS servers. For instance, if there is an internal user using Outlook, well, they will still connect to Office 365, and then it's Office 365 who will make an inbound connection to ADFS. To authenticate the user. However, if the internal user is using OWA, then he will connect to the ADFS server himself. So there's different authentication flows, and we'll keep it at a high level without going into too much detail. But the bigger picture here is to make you understand there's a lot of little bits and pieces that fit in together and that fit tightly together. So there isn't much room for error here because a failing organization relationship means no FreeBSD information. A connector that's misconfigured means no mail flow. ADFS server down means no one gets access to his or her emails or SharePoint or anything that's in Office 365. So the slightest problem here might cause issues. The question is, how do you actually start troubleshooting it, right? So let's take a look at some of the building blocks, more feature-wise than of a hybrid deployment. So first of all, there's federation, fueled by OAuth if you're in a purely Exchange 2013 CU5 or later environment, or by organization relationships if you're in a mixed environment. And the federation part is responsible for FreeBSD, mail tips, message tracking, cross-premises e-discovery, and so forth and so on. Then there is the DirSync component. It's not so much a feature, but it enables having a unified global address list. It allows mailboxes to be moved to Office 365 and back. And it also enables a feature called online archiving, where you can have an archive in Office 365, but tied to an on-premises mailbox. Then there's secure transport, anything that has to do with mail flow between both environments. It's TLS encrypted. It's forced TLS encrypted, which then forces the header preservation, which in turn causes Outlook to behave differently. And then a good example here of that is that when an on-premises user sends a message to a cloud user, and the hybrid mail flow is configured correctly and everything is working, then if a cloud user opens that message and checks the contact card for the user who sent the message, he will get the rich experience, the full the full contact card with all the information. However, if TLS failed for some reason, the message might still be delivered, but you will have a slightly different experience. For instance, mail tips might not show up because Office 365 or Exchange on premises might think that the sender or the recipient of the email that you're trying to write to is actually external instead of internal. So there's a lot of things dependent there. And then last but not least, it's a feature more for admins, not really for the users themselves, which are the mailbox moves, which allow you to move mailboxes back and forth, pretty much the same way how mailboxes are moved between forests on premises, or actually it's very similar to how a mailbox is moved within an organization. And one of the benefits there is that, of course, after the mailbox move, there is no OST resync. So the OST file that was built up before will actually remain the same. So as you can see, there's a lot of things feature-wise then, not necessarily architecture-wise, but a lot of features that you get from a hybrid deployment. And as I said, and I'll repeat it a few times probably throughout the session, there's a lot of things going on and a lot of room where things can go wrong. Now let's take a look at some of the things that I see. And of course, we're limited in time, so I'll barely scratch the surface of what you can encounter. But at least when we talk about DirSync, what I noticed in a DirSync environment is that either it synchronizes or it doesn't synchronize at all, which means that if it's broken badly. And you'll pretty much notice quite quickly. Well, maybe not. I mean, the problem with DirSync is it's a process which runs every 3 hours, so you don't expect it to run immediately. And when you create a user and you know that you have to wait 3 hours, well, it might be 4 hours, 5 hours before you check. You might even check a day later, and in the meantime, you might, not notice that DirSync isn't running. Um, the good thing is that you can live without DirSync for a few hours, unless you're making changes. But it's perfectly fine to have DirSync, not run, troubleshoot DirSync, as long as you're okay with the fact that you will have no new users that are being created in Office 365. Any changes that you made won't make it to Office 365, and so forth and so on. Another problem that you can see is that DirSync is synchronizing, but it's having issues with a subset of the accounts. And these are the successful but completed with error warnings that you will see in DirSync. And we'll get to them when I do the demo in just a minute. And typically this happens when you have duplicate accounts. For instance, you've got mailboxes with with an email address, and then for some reason you've got a AD contact that uses the same email address, maybe because you copied them. And there's many reasons what could go wrong there. And what will happen is that Office 365 will not be able to, or DirSync, sorry, will not be able to sync the second object, the conflicting object, into Office 365, and it will throw a warning. Now, the good thing here is that Microsoft will actually send you a message telling you, hey, you know what? You tried synchronizing, but there are some conflicts, and here are the conflicts that we talk about. So you will proactively be notified about it, but then still you need to resolve the issue, and that isn't always easy. So that's something that we will be taking a look at. And then last but not least, there is attributes not being written back properly, and these obviously only apply in a hybrid deployment where there's a subset, about 5 or 6 attributes that need to be written back into your on-premises environment to maintain that seamless experience that users have when being moved across premises. So before we dive into the practical stuff, how does DirSync actually work? Well, as this screen will illustrate, there's on one side Active Directory, on the other side Office 365, Azure AD, you get the picture. And in between there's DirSync, AADSync, AADConnect, but they're all built on the same principle because they all share the same technology underneath, which comes from ILM, MIIS, FIM, whatever you want to call it. It's had a fair share of different names over the years. So when you take a look, what actually happens in the first step in the hybrid configuration wizard is that objects from Active Directory are pulled in to the metaverse through a management agent. It used to be called the Source AD management agent. You might now see that it has the name of your on-premises Active Directory, depending on the version of DirSync you're using. But it's more to give you a general idea. The metaverse is a staging area which is used by the DirSync process, by the DirSync tool, to determine, okay, which objects are linked together, and which objects should get updated, should get written back, and so forth and so on. From there, from the metaverse, using the target web service management agent, or in other words, the connection to Office 365, objects will get written, updated, deleted, depending on what happened with them in Active Directory. So if you take these steps into account in the way to Office 365, then it's very normal to see the write back attributes being written back in the same way. They go from Office 365 into the metaverse, the objects are being updated, calculated what updates actually need to be written back, and then the source AD management agent writes back the appropriate attributes into the on-premises Active Directory. So let's have a look at how you should start troubleshooting if you, for instance, get such an email telling you, hey, there's a conflict in an object. So let me quickly open up my DirSync server. There you go. And what I did is I opened the Synchronization Service Manager, also known as the MIS client, on the DirSync server itself. And what you can see under the Operations tab is all the previous synchronizations that happened. Now, what you can see here, for instance, is that there is a completed an export error, which means that, DirSync ran, it did what it had to do, but it encountered one or more errors, right? In this case, there was an update that was done, or an update that was tried to be exported, which didn't work. So what you can do then is by clicking on the export errors, because the GUID you see here doesn't tell you a lot, you will actually get more information about what the problem is. And as you can see here, these are the new values of the object that is trying to be created in Office 365. How do I know this is Office 365? Well, exporting changes through the management agent or through the connection to the to the tenant actually means that you're trying to do something in your tenant. So now it's time to figure out what we're trying to do, and here it's trying to add the object and add a bunch of attributes to the object. The email that you will get from Microsoft will actually contain more information about the object itself, and sometimes it takes a little while going through each of the objects to see what actually causing the issue. But right here I can tell you that the user principal name that we're trying to add actually is not a correct user principal name. More specifically, as you can see here, there is James space Robinson at exchangelab.be. Now that is not supported. You cannot have a space in your user principal name. So all it would take for me to solve this problem is go into my on-premises environment, preferably Active Directory or Exchange, doesn't matter, anywhere I can, and change the user principal name for the user. So let's do that for a second. Let's move over to one of the Exchange servers. So bear with me for a second, and I will take the Exchange server. There we go. And go to the object that we just discussed. Might take a second or two to actually update or actually open. Okay, and as you can see, it opened in the meantime. So here is users. So let's find the user who was causing issues. And if I'm correct, that was James Robinson. So we have the user here. And what I will do is I will update the user account to something which is supported, for instance, james.robinson. I'll apply this and then go back to my DirSync server. And there we go. What I will do now is force the synchronization of DirSync. So we'll let that happen for a few seconds. And as you can see, it goes through each and every of the steps. So it goes by pulling in information from the on-premises environment into the metaverse. And as you can see, there was an update. Then it will pull information from the Office 365 environment, and it will see that nothing changed there. So now we'll start exporting information. Oh, sorry, click the wrong button there. Let me go back to the top. There we go. So it's exporting information. And as you can see, it now successfully made a change. So again, like we did before, clicking the ads gives me more information. And as you can see from here, it was now actually successfully able to update the object in Office 365. So no more completed export errors here. That's basically what we were looking for, right? So this is a very powerful tool, but it does require some getting used to. And again, I didn't touch every object or aspect of the tool, which means that obviously sometimes you'll need to dive in deeper. But it gives you an idea of what you can do with it. And as an administrator, if you're dealing with DirSync in your environment, you'll definitely have to, run into this scenario sooner or later. So let's move on to the next topic. Active Directory Federation Services. So, what's the problem with ADFS? Well, you heard the sigh. It's good when it works, but when it doesn't work, things get hectic because the error messages that you get, if at all, can be very cryptic, very code stylish alike, and doesn't always give away what is actually happening. So, as a result of this, troubleshooting is not easy. Not only because messages are cryptic, but also because you only see half of the story. So the ADFS authentication flows consist of two parts. You talk to Office 365, depending on which type of traffic that we're talking about, which could be OWA, Outlook, ActiveSync, SharePoint. I mean, any type of connection that you're making to Office 365. And depending on who's connecting, from where you're connecting, and what you're doing, there's a different authentication flow. If it's a web client, it's a passive authentication flow, meaning that the client will connect to ADFS itself. If it's active connection or active authentication flow, it means that the authentication platform in Office 365 will make an inbound connection to Office 365. But either way, you have no insights into what is happening in Office 365 other than the fact that you have to trust that it is working there. Now, this being said, it is maybe working there, but it can be broken there too. So, truth be told, I haven't seen it fail in quite a while now, but assume that something is wrong, or assuming that something is wrong in Office 365, and if that happens, then you might be chasing ghosts because there's no way for you to tell whether or not it's broken unless you're absolutely 100% sure that your on-premises environment is still working. Anyway, so you only have half of the story. You can only see what's happening in your on-premises environment. And usually when you're diving into the ADFS flows and troubleshooting what is happening there, you might need some third-party tools to help you figure out what actually happens. And in terms of ADFS, Fiddler is a really good tool that can help you, see what is happening, where you're being redirected to, and so forth and so on. But it's definitely not easy. So what we're going to do now is take a look at one of my ADFS servers and see what is happening there. So first of all, let me move to one of the ADFS servers. There we go. Okay, so as you can see here on that ADFS server, I already opened up the logs. And just like you would expect for any other component in Windows, in the Crimson channel, there's a log file, an admin log file, which contains more information about how your environment is doing. As you can see here, I've got some issues, right? But nonetheless, these issues can be safely ignored because that's one of the servers in my farm causing some issues, and I kind of bypass them for testing purposes, but just to illustrate that issues are there. Now, these issues that you see here have more to do with the configuration of ADFS. If a request fails, that's not something you would notice here. For that, you would actually need to enable the analytic and debug logs, which I already have, and then you will see that the ADFS tracing log will become available. So we'll see what happens once we enable the log here. So right now we have an empty log which is querying some stuff. What I will do is I will go to the Office 365 portal and try logging in as one of my users here. So I'm being redirected to Office 365 authentication platform, which redirects me back to my own ADFS server. And just for giggles, let's enter a wrong password here. So as you can see, obviously, ADFS already tells me there is an incorrect user ID or password, but let's just, imagine there is another issue going on. So if we go back to the ADFS server, you will see that the log is no longer empty. So we refresh that. In the time between doing the request and actually taking a look in the log, you will see that there's a lot of events in there. So it might sometimes take you a while to actually go through it and find something. Now, as you can see here, when you go through the events, you see everything that is happening in the environment. And what I'm actually looking for is a specific event which mentions that the request which I did was unauthorized. So let's have a quick look. Oh, there we are. We see some other authentication attempts, and here you are. Event ID 52, for instance, kind of tells me that the security token is not valid, meaning that whatever I try to authenticate doesn't work. Obviously, we already knew that based on what we saw, but at least we have confirmation here. The same thing kind of applies when wrong tokens are being passed along, when there is something really not working under the hood. The error message that you will see here from the ADFS logs will actually tell you much, much more and are very efficient in helping you figuring out what's wrong with ADFS. So again, to kind of summarize the ADFS troubleshooting, and again, this is very high level. It is not easy, but doing the basic stuff, troubleshooting 101, go through the event logs, open up the debug logs, and more importantly, reproduce the error message, right? Reproduce the issue, and you will be pretty safe there. Worst case scenario, if you're not being redirected properly, then either involve the networking team or use tools like Fiddler to figure out where your browser, your client is being redirected to. Obviously, this will only work in situations where you're using the passive authentication flow like I just did in my browser. If you're dealing with Outlook, then it becomes much more difficult. A good tool which I like to use as well for troubleshooting ADFS, specifically to Office 365, is using the remote connectivity analyzer, which has an authentication test, and it will actually go through each of the steps and tell you what might or might not be wrong. Now, from an implementation point of view, if you have ADFS proxy servers and an ADFS server farm internally, instead of having them load balance to each other, meaning that you load balance across ADFS proxy servers and then these ADFS proxy servers load balance to your internal array, for troubleshooting purposes, you can tie one ADFS proxy to one ADFS server to simplify the flow of data while you're troubleshooting. So that's just a tip. And then last but not least, understanding the different authentication flows. Like I mentioned, the active authentication and the passive authentication flow for ADFS are critically important because that will, either tell you, yes, there's something that you can look at, or no, there's something that you can look at. Maybe it's on the Microsoft side, but at least it gives you more information about, or a bigger understanding of what is happening. Now let's move on to Exchange Federation. As I said earlier, a lot of components come into play there. There's Federation Gateway, Organization Relationship, Certificates, Remote Organization Relationships, there's Domain Federation Information, there's Auto Discover, crucial role if you're in Exchange 2013 CU5 or you have configured it manually. There's OAuth. So there's a lot of things that come into play. But first, let's take a look at how Federation works using the Microsoft Federation Gateway. For instance, for doing a FreeBSD request lookup. So we have an organization on the left, an organization to the right, and there is a mailbox, a colleague of mine with whom I wrote a blog post, who is trying to query FreeBSD information for my mailbox, who is located in Office 365 in my hybrid counterpart. So that mailbox sends a request to the Exchange server. The Exchange server looks up the recipient, sees that it's actually a mail-enabled user with a target address pointing to the cloud. We'll then check whether or not there is an organization relationship for the domain that is in the target address. And if there is, then we'll go out to the Federation Gateway, get a token from the Federation Gateway, Federation token, gets it back, then sends the request for FreeBSD information along with the token that it received from the Federation Gateway to the remote organization, in this case being Office 365. Office 365 then checks whether or not the certificate that it received from the Microsoft Federation Gateway, the MFG, is valid. Of course, because it is trusted, it can decipher the certificate, and as a result, the request is authenticated, and it will then, check whether or not there's an organization relationship, and if there is, what are the authentication settings? So, what kind of information is it allowed to request? Is it just basic FreeBSD information, or is it FreeBSD information with details? It will then query the remote mailbox, being my mailbox in that point at that time, and then send back the information to the on-premises Exchange server, which then returns the information to the requester. There's a lot of steps in between, and usually this only takes a second or two, maybe three. Of course, depending on connectivity as well. So as you can see, your internet connection could be something causing issues. Certificates could be causing issues. Maybe it's your Exchange server. Maybe it's the MFG. There's a lot of things that come into play here. Now, there is good news for you here. Microsoft has developed a bunch of test commandlets which you can use to troubleshoot Federation, and that's something I'm gonna focus on now. So let's have a look at my Exchange server. Here it is, the Exchange server. And in a hybrid deployment, what you will actually have is organization relationship, which points to Office 365. And that organization relationship in an Exchange 2013 environment kind of looks like this: on-premises to Office 365. And it contains a bunch of information. Now there's a test commandlet, test organization relationship, and by using the get organization relationship commandlet and then piping it to the test organization relationship, you can see if it's still working. So either you do that during troubleshooting, or you can do that proactively. So when you run the command, it asks for a user identity. So I'm specifying one of my users, which is allowed to use the organization relationship to query FreeBSD information. And what it actually does is it will go out and try and fetch that information. So first of all, it validates the configuration, gets information or federation information for the remote organization, checks the consistency, checks whether a delegation token can be received from the Federation Gateway, then goes out to the remote organization, does a FreeBSD request, gets the request, and then determines whether or not the result was a success. As you can see here, everything is working as expected. Now, there is a discrepancy between both environments. As you can see, the values of the property mailbox move enabled are different. Those do not matter in this case, and can be safely ignored. But at least it gives you an idea of what's going on. If, for instance, the certificates would have expired, or if there is a configuration mismatch or something else that is going on, this can really help you. Similarly, for the new feature in Exchange 2013, there is a test OAuth configuration. Test OAuth connectivity, which allows you to test your the OAuth configuration between both environments and make sure that you can use OAuth for federated authentication. It's not federated, just use OAuth for authenticating both environments to one another. If you want more information about test commandlets, then you can just run the get command test, and you will see there's a lot of test commandlets in there. But specifically to a Office 365 hybrid deployment, there is the test OAuth connectivity. There is the test migration server availability commandlet, which is ran from Office 365. There is a test organization relationship. And once the test organization relationship deemed there is issues, then you can start using test federation trust certificate, because those are the underlying components that make up that organization relationship, or which the organization relationship relies upon. So as you can see, there's definitely some things in there that you can use to make your life easier when it comes down to troubleshooting those hybrid deployment. Now, this being said, I'm more about avoiding troubleshooting. Who isn't, right? I mean, it's an argument which is kind of void, but it's true. I mean, how do you avoid troubleshooting? Well, first of all, by making sure that whatever you configure is configured properly, but also by keeping an eye on what's happening. Sometimes by monitoring what's happening in your environment, you can be proactive. You can act upon something before it is too late. For instance, by monitoring the expiry date of your certificates, you can make sure that you get an alert in time, which allows you more than enough time to go to Office, go buy a new certificate, implement a certificate, update the configuration before it is too late. So monitoring Exchange hybrid deployments is a change in the monitoring paradigm. Why is that? Well, you still have some on-premises servers that you care about, like DirSync, ADFS, really important. Um, Exchange servers, obviously, you still have some there, and if you don't, well, in a hybrid deployment, you at least have that single server for management capabilities, but still, there's a component to take a look at. But when we're talking about Office 365, you couldn't care less about the servers. That's Microsoft's problem. But you do care about the service. And how do you monitor services? How do you monitor whether or not a service is still working? Well, to be honest, the only way to do that is to do synthetic transactions, to actually try and mimic a user's action, like sending a message, querying FreeBusy, doing what a regular user will do, and determining whether or not that is still working. And by doing so, you can identify faster where the problem is located. So um, will it help you to faster solve a problem? Perhaps. If the problem is related to what's happening in your on-premises environment, then I'd say definitely yes. If your ADFS is down and you can monitor your ADFS environment and it tells you that it's your ADFS server, well, the impact is that you don't get access to Office 365, but you are causing the issue, so you can solve it quicker by monitoring it. But imagine that you're in a situation where there is a problem in Office 365. For instance, June 23rd, 2014, there was an outage in Office 365 where some organizations couldn't send email for a long, or actually emails couldn't get sent out for a long period of time. And that's typically the kind of error which you don't see immediately because email isn't direct in terms of you send the hit the send button and then the email goes off, and whether it's received 1 second later or 3 seconds later, usually you don't stop to think about that. But sometimes it takes a few hours for a message to deliver, not because it's normal, but because maybe something's wrong. And unless you check in with the recipient of the email, there's basically no way for you of telling whether or not the message was successfully delivered unless you get the delay status notification telling you, hey, we couldn't deliver the message because X, Y, or Z. Anyway, between the time that you get the delivery status notification which tells you that the message was delayed and the message actually being sent, there could be a lot of time in between. So again, monitoring whether any of the functionalities work is really important to be faster about knowing it, be faster about solving it if the problem is caused on premises, and also be faster to escalate issues to Office 365 support. So again, customers that were using our monitoring solution last year, they knew within about 15 minutes that mail wasn't arriving within the predefined thresholds. So they waited another cycle of tests, and then they were absolutely positively sure they were sending out messages to Office 365, but it was Office 365 who wasn't sending out messages to the world. Now, in that case, they couldn't solve the problem. Obviously, they couldn't log in REP into the servers in Office 365, restart whatever services or whatever caused the problem. That's up to Microsoft. But at least they had the information, they had the certitude that they now could go to their management, tell their management, hey, by the way, we know what's wrong. It's caused by Microsoft. We have the proof here. We've already been in touch with Microsoft support, handed over all the information. We did our due diligence. We did our testing. And now we still have to wait. But at least it makes the communication to your management and your users a lot better. Now, when taking a look at what you need to monitor in a hybrid deployment, it basically comes down to all the building blocks and the architectural components which I talked about 40 minutes ago. DirSync, critically important. Is the server up and running? Is synchronization up and running? And is it completing successfully? Are there any synchronization issues? Identity federation. Is ADFS working? Are my servers up and running? Can people connect from the outside? Can people connect from the inside? Mail flow. Am I able to send messages to the internet? Can I receive from the internet? Can I even send messages between my on-premises environment and Office 365? Because they can and cannot, or they can be related, not necessarily should be related. So it is perfectly possible that you can send messages back and forth between both environments, but you're not able to send messages to the internet. And the other way around, it's perfectly possible that you can receive messages from the internet, but are not able to send or receive messages between your on-premises environment and Office 365. So there's a lot of, if then else's. Certificates critically important, more specifically the communication certificates for Exchange and ADFS. Make sure that you know well up front when they're going to expire so that you can replace them if needed. And then last but not least, the basics of everything, connectivity. You must make sure that you can connect properly from within your network, from within the data center where your hybrid service line, where ADFS is, but of course from the internet. You should be checking whether or not your internet users can get to Office 365 and whether or not your internal users can connect to Office 365 as well. So this brings me to the last 2 or 3 minutes of this presentation, where I briefly want to talk about our solution, Mailscape 365. And by the way, feel free to go to our website or click the link in the presentation to download a free trial. What we bring to the table is a solution which does full Exchange monitoring or full Exchange online monitoring, but we also do the hybrid monitoring. We focus on that too. So we do everything we monitor all of the items that I talked about before, the organization relationships, OAuth connectivity, certificates, DirSync. We do that by taking a look at the log files. We do synthetic transactions. So we have our engine which will periodically send messages, query-free busy information, so that we have a complete view of the world and be able to give you that information that you're looking for. Additionally, our solution will also take a look at your data center. So we have probes within your own network, and we have a probe from the internet which will do an inbound test into your environment and also an inbound test into Office 365 to give you that different, location affinity that you're looking for. Is it an internal issue? Is it an internet issue? Is it a broader issue? To give you that granularity that you're looking for. So this being said, thanks for attending the session. Sorry. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. And if not, I look forward to the next time and to following up on your questions if we don't have enough time anymore. Thanks, and talk to you later.